Thomas Jefferson was born in the Virginia colony in 1743. At 5, he was teased stutterer by his cousin because of his stammer. At 14, he lost his father and inherited 10,000 acres of land, yet wrote in his diary, "Wealth is a chain." At 20, he entered the College of William and Mary, studying 16 hours a night. His professor sighed. He is not a student, but a ghost of the library. At 27, elected as a legislator to oppose the Stamp Act, yet mocked by rivals for his stammer, "Your quill is more useful than your mouth." At 33, drafting the Declaration of Independence, he mocked himself. "My ideals end at my cotton fields." At 35, serving as governor of Virginia, he fled in panic when British troops invaded and was impeached coward by political opponents. At 40, his wife Martha died. He held her relics and cried for 3 days, vowing never to remarry. At 47, serving as an envoy to France, he fell in love with wine and Enlightenment ideas, yet confessed in his diary, "The freedom of Paris reminds me of the chains back home." At 53, elected the 3rd President of the United States, he refused to abolish slavery, saying, "This is a hot potato for future generations." At 60, after leaving office, he founded the University of Virginia and personally designed the domed library. At 73, he reconciled with his old rival John Adams through letters, calling each other old friend. At 82, on the 50th anniversary of independence, he refused to use the plow he invented, lying in Monticello and saying to the doctor, "Let the young people reclaim the land." At 83, Thomas Jefferson passed away. His tombstone only engraved author of the Declaration of Independence, father of the University of Virginia, without mentioning his presidency. On his deathbed, he burned all private letters, murmuring, "Let history remember the light and forget the shadow." Robert Peary was born in 1856 to a miner's family in Pennsylvania. As a child, classmates threw stones at him and called him Coal Kid because of his dark skin. At 12, he went down the mine with his father choked by coal dust until he coughed up blood. He stared at the mine lamp's flame and thought, "Fire melts ice, and ice freezes the sea." At 18, he entered the Naval Academy. Spinning the globe wildly in navigation class, a professor sighed, "You belong at the North Pole, not in the classroom." At 25, he lost 8 toes to frostbite during his first Arctic expedition. Doctors wanted to amputate his leg, but he refused through gritted teeth. "Keep them, they know the way." At 29, leading a dog sled team, he got lost and his teammates froze to death. Hugging the dead dogs, he cried, "I'm sorry, I thought the Arctic had an end." At 33, he published his paper Conjectures on the Arctic Route, only to be mocked by academia, a black man dreaming of a white wilderness. At 35, during his 6th Arctic trip, his sled broke. He sewed it up with frozen hands, not making a sound even when the needle pricked his flesh. At 39, he planted a flag and claimed to have reached the North Pole, but was accused of fraud by his rival Frederick Cook, who claimed to have arrived first. At 41, during a U.S. congressional investigation, he hugged the blood-stained stars and stripes and roared, "I traded my toes for this coordinate." In the end, Congress recognized him as the first to arrive. At 45, his sponsors withdrew funding. He made a living by selling polar bear skins and giving lectures while the audience yawned. At 50, he lived in seclusion in a cabin in Maine in his later years, raising carrier pigeons to send messages. When the pigeons froze to death, he buried them in the snow, with an epitaph reading, "They are more reliable than humans." At 53, he died in New York. His last words were, "Burn my sled, I don't want to pull lies anymore." Peary ventured to the Arctic 9 times in his life, crippling his feet but measuring the crown of the earth. In the final entry of his diary, he wrote, "The Arctic didn't lie to me, I lied to the Arctic." John D. Rockefeller was born in 1839 into a poor accountant's family in New York. At 6, he sold candy to his sister and earned his first $50. At 12, he used his savings to buy a neighbor's turkey and sold it at a high price the next year, yet his father took the profit, saying, "This is a tuition fee." At 16, he dropped out of school to work as a bookkeeper and reviewed accounts late every night. Colleagues mocked him, "He's calculating interest even in his sleep." At 23, he invested in an oil refinery and personally guarded the furnaces at night, recording the cost of every drop of oil. At 27, he founded Standard Oil and swallowed up competitors through secret rebates, earning the media nickname Octopus. At 35, he monopolized 90% of America's oil refining market but suffered from insomnia due to pressure, his hair turning white overnight. At 40, during the antitrust trial, he hid in his office eating cold bread, murmuring, "The law doesn't understand efficiency." At 45, Standard Oil was broken up. He appeared bankrupt on the surface but secretly held shares in 26 companies, his wealth increasing rather than decreasing. At 50, he resigned from all positions due to stomach illness, and doctors predicted he would not live more than a year. At 53, he began donating money to build the University of Chicago, only to be accused of whitewashing with blood money. At 60, he founded the Rockefeller Foundation and anonymously funded hookworm eradication, yet Southern farmers burned his portraits. At 70, with wealth exceeding $100 million, he only ate bread and drank milk, refusing to use his own oil company's stock as a napkin. At 75, when a reporter asked about his secret to success, he replied, "Live one more hour every day." At 80, when his grandson asked if he was afraid of death, he pointed to the oil wells outside the window and said, "Those wells will outlive me." At 97, Rockefeller died in his sleep, leaving a final message: "My greatest investment is spending money where others can't see it."
Elvis Presley was born in 1935 in a shabby small house in Mississippi. His childhood was supported by his mother's sewing work. At 8, he showed his singing talent for the first time in the church choir, but was nicknamed Mute Nightingale because of his shyness. At 13, he moved to Memphis with his family and became obsessed with black blues music, often listening to the radio secretly to imitate the singing style. At 18, he recorded a demo at Sun Studio. His unique voice shocked the studio owner. At 21, his single Heartbreak Hotel became a huge hit. His hip-swiveling dance moves sparked controversy, and conservatives criticized him for undermining morality. At 25, he joined the military. His image shifted from a rebellious teenager to a patriotic icon. At 27, after being discharged from the military, he entered Hollywood and starred in Blue Hawaii, yet sighed, "Movies are like an assembly line, eroding my soul." At 30, he became addicted to drugs to cope with the pressure of tours, gained weight sharply, and his marriage hit a rough patch. At 35, he made a comeback performance in Las Vegas, which was sold out every show, but his health deteriorated. Privately, he looked at himself in the mirror and muttered, "Am I still that choir boy?" At 40, after his divorce, he indulged in parties. In the recording studio, he spoke to an empty microphone, "My voice can't save me." At 42, Presley died of a sudden heart attack. He held his old guitar in his hand and hummed the church songs he sang as a child until his last moment. Throughout his life, he released countless records and defined rock and roll, yet was devoured by fame and fortune. Before his death, he wrote in his diary, "I gave the world my heart, but forgot to leave some for myself."